News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue, flying high on.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, and every week on this show, we uphold values that will never, ever die. As our audience knows, we have been following one story in particular very carefully, and that is the story of what happened to Navy SEAL Team 6. 30 American service members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan on August 6th of 2011, and the parents cried out for answers. They were not satisfied with the answers that the military was giving them, and they won a congressional hearing. And today we have breaking news. We have the parents of deceased Navy SEAL team member Aaron Vaughn. Billy and Karen Vaughn are here to tell us what happened on Capitol Hill. From what I understand, the hearings were really disappointed, and the parents are frustrated and outraged at what took place. Can you tell our audience what happened?
Okay, well, I guess probably the easiest thing, Dr. Grace, is to tell them what didn't happen, because very little happened today. We basically had a committee put together, the National Security Subcommittee of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. About half of them showed up, and they basically asked softball questions of a lot of retired military personnel, and not a lot, but a couple retired military personnel and some other military personnel, none of which were in their positions at the time of the shoot-down of Extortion 17. Only one congressman even asked any questions that were had any intention of getting to the bottom of any of the questions that the families have been asking, and that was Congressman Micah of Florida. The rest of the questions were pretty much just statements. Some talked about constituents that lived in their hometown that died on that chopper, and talked about how nice it was to attend ceremonies. And so, I mean, this is really what happened today. It was defeating, depressing, and very disappointing.
Right, and you also mentioned when we talked earlier that you believe that there's also some disinformation going about. There's a report that the family members didn't want the hearing, some false propaganda. Can you explain what all that's about?
Yeah, I don't really have all the details about that. I've just gotten word from a couple different sources, and one of them was a man that was in the meeting today, said that he had gotten a lot of signatures from people that didn't want, they just made a big deal out of it. Some of the families do not want this hearing, and I really don't even know why they would make a deal out of that, because they were there because some of the families did want the hearing. So, to me, it was just another attempt to try to shame us, and they actually went a step further and made it sound like they clearly insinuated that those of us who still have questions about this shoot down are just people who haven't dealt with our grief properly. It was that insulting.
Oh, my goodness. This is absolutely outrageous. And I know, Billy, that you're also equally upset and frustrated about what's happening in Washington, D.C. in terms of not getting you and the rest of the family members the answers that you crave.
That's correct. Today, we got more conflicting stories that we haven't heard. One about the black box. The guy, Mr. Reed, just sat there and unequivocally said that there were no black boxes on any of these CH-47s. And while that could be true, and maybe it is true, it's conflicting to the stories that we've heard before. I was going over some of the military testimony we have right before we talked to y'all tonight with a friend on the phone, and in Exhibit 65, it's entitled "The Black Box." the Pathfinder the Pathfinder crew testified that they knew where to look for the black box, and that they couldn't get to it that night because it was too hot. And the next day a flood had come. But what he says, this is what he says. He says this is the first one where we didn't recover the black box. There have been 13 other crashes of CH-47s in Afghanistan, and apparently they were able to recover a black box off every one of them. But today we hear a broad statement that none of them had black boxes on. Now, if this is true, why does it take 2.5 years to get the right answer?
Right. That doesn't jive with what they said before, that there was a black box that had washed away in a flash flood.
Absolutely.
I mean, I reported on that.
That's absolutely the truth. That's absolutely the truth, and that's the way it is about many things. Today, a conflicting report. And as far as the Muslim who chanted over the bodies of the Americans, today we have Mr. Reid who sits there in the hearing, finally get to the congressional hearing, and when he's asked the question about what they said, well, I don't really understand Arabic, so I know it was said that he said some things, but I can't really tell. This is their expert. This is who testifies to settle it all. If it were not so serious, it would be a comedy. These people are a freaking joke. The way they sit there and carry on. It's just unreal. It's just, and they expect you to take it.
Right.
They expect you to walk away and be quiet.
Right. Well, that's not going to happen. I tell you this, the American people are going to continue to stand with you, and we are going to get to the bottom of this. Did you get any information on the swap of the 7 members of the Afghan National Army? Because there was a lot of discussion that at the last minute, the 7 that were supposed to go on were swapped with somebody else. Were those questions raised, and were any answers given on that?
Well, I was told last Thursday that we would never get the answer to that because it had been classified by the military. Today, however, Mr. Reid, out of the blue, comes out and says, well, what happened with the 7 Afghans is the Rangers accidentally took the wrong ones on their op, so the SEALs had to take the Rangers Afghans on their op, so they weren't the ones who were supposed to be on there. And that's the story they expect us to swallow. Why didn't they say that 2 years ago? This is what they come up with today. I mean, if they'd have come out with that 2 years ago, it would be one thing. But now all of a sudden, classified last week, but here's what they tell the nation today. Another conflicting story that nobody has ever heard. So that when you are told the truth, you can't buy it as the truth anymore. So we don't know, if we're being fed cow chips or the truth. I mean, these are stories we've never heard,
Well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. I mean, it's obvious that there's a cover-up going on here. Look, I've been reporting on Benghazi ever since that took place, and it was lies upon lies and cover-up upon cover-up, and this is the same pattern. And also the hearing that you're describing, it's the same pattern of the Obama administration. There's public outrage. There's an investigation and a hearing, and then when the public still asks questions, they say, well, we've investigated, we've had the hearings, it's all said and done. But that's not the case. Recently, President Obama said regarding the IRS that there's not a smidgen of corruption. So we know that that's not true. We know that they are covering up systematically the gross incompetence and the gross crimes that are going on up and down the administration. So this is part of the same pattern. And it's obvious to me that if you're getting this kind of conflicting information, the real story is extremely damaging. Otherwise, they would have no need to keep stalling and keep coming up with different stories.
Well, the thing of it is I believe you're absolutely right. And the thing of it is they think we're just going to go away. And here's the problem, though. When you sit there and look at the committee, you got half of them up there Republicans. You got half of them that are not even there that don't show up. You got half of them that come in and ask their question, and they show up and ask their question, and they're gone on with something else. It's just they don't have the time for anything to do their job properly, or they don't care about their job. And it looks like most of the Republicans are just as bad as the Democrats. They think they're a hierarchy, And, I'm not saying that they're covering anything up, but they sure are not helping get to the bottom of anything. They're really not.
Yes, and I hear that over and over again as well. And one of the things that has to be pointed out is this story should be leading the news every single night. We're not talking about just, one battle. We are talking about the team that killed one of America's foremost enemy, Osama bin Laden. This was a historic moment in American history. This is a moment that the president certainly had the time for when he was celebrating the victory, right? He had the time to talk about it when it was his re-election campaign was underway, when he was patting himself and the generals on the back. They had plenty of time to talk about it back then, didn't they? But now that we're talking about the casualties, that team that was involved, how they died, was the vice president involved in causing that death in any way by putting a target on their back? Oh, now nobody has the time. And now the parents who are grieving, rightfully so, are being dismissed as idiots, which is completely outrageous. People can grieve, yes, but that doesn't mean that they don't have legitimate questions. That doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. Doesn't mean that they don't know what they're talking about. And I can say this about Billy and Karen Vaughn: you guys are as sharp as anybody I've ever met, and I was in D.C. for over a decade. So it's obvious that they are trying to just get you guys to shut up and go away, and it's not going to happen because just like with Benghazi, the American people smell a rat. And this story has lots of rats. In fact, the key rats, from what you're telling me, weren't even called to testify.
That's absolutely true. I mean, we had nobody there to testify that had actual knowledge of the shoot down that night. Not one single person. Not one single person. Their expert that answered most of the questions on behalf of, the tactical command, that whole aspect of it, we were told he retired in 2007, 4 years before this crash ever took place, and that's their expert witness today.
Now,
and it, it's an atrocity. I'll tell you, it's an atrocity.
It is. This is an insult upon an insult. This is an insult upon a tragedy. I mean, it's absolutely unacceptable. And tell me something. What about the fact, when you all won the congressional hearing, I understood that they were going to be investigating this in tandem with the Benghazi. What's your sense of that? I mean, are they not doing this in tandem, or is this now being relegated as a separate investigation?
Yeah, this investigation is over, Dr. Grace. I mean, this was a pat on the back to shut up some parents who were questioning senior military leadership in the Obama administration, and this is over. I've never actually heard it tied in any way to Benghazi, except just in language people use, that it's the same sort of betrayal of U.S. forces and U.S. treasure. I really feel like this is a closed book for Congress. I'm not sure if we can get anything else out of them. And as Billy said earlier, at some point you just become as a parent. First off, we're still dealing with the grief of losing our son, and second, now we're just dealing with the concept, trying to swallow the concept that nobody in power in this country really cares whether or not he was compromised, whether or not the 29 others were compromised, whether or not so many after them have been compromised by these rules of engagement, that have cost the lives of so many of our sons and daughters.
Right. Well,
and,
Billy and Karen, you're frustrated today, and rightfully so, but I can tell you that the American people are going to be outraged when they hear about this. This is far from over. They should consider this battle has only just begun. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, and we are going to fight and fight and fight for the truth, because we are going to uphold values that are never, ever going to die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Give us your tired and weak, and we will make them strong. Bring us your far-run songs, and we will sing along.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. And today we are interviewing Billy and Karen Vaughn. In the last segment, you told us all about the congressional hearing, which was a big disappointment. And I know the hearts of Billy and Karen Vaughn. I know that they're fighting not just for the answers for their own deceased son, but they're fighting also for things to change for the current American forces. And I know the two of you have been on a campaign to get the rules of engagement altered. Can you tell us what is going on in Afghanistan? How are these rules of engagement endangering our troops there?
You know, the best way to tell you is just to share a couple stories, if you don't mind. We've met one mother whose son was shot in the throat by an Afghan ally, quote, unquote, who was allowed to man the watchtower on a U.S. base and open fire on the unarmed U.S. soldiers below. Killed her son. You know, and this is a matter of appeasement, kind of a different thing. You know, where we're trying to win the hearts and minds and trying to work alongside people in Afghanistan who can or cannot be trusted. We never know. We never know till they kill somebody. We've got another mother whose son was killed a father that we've met whose son was killed while lifting weights on his base after he was taunted and tormented for weeks upon end, actually wrote a letter home to his dad and had a phone conversation with his dad saying, I'm not going to be able to come home. I'm not coming home from this war, and it's not going to be in a battle that I die. I'm going to get killed by these guys working on our base, and he did. You know, these are the sort of things. But then when you get to the rules of engagement out in the field, we had a ranger tell us that he got out of a career that he loved and thrived in for years and years. But after the rules of engagement began to shift in 2009, he started seeing some serious effects on he and his brothers. And the final straw was when one of his good friends was shot while his friend was arguing with his commander on a radio of whether or not he could engage the Taliban members who had opened fire on them, and was being told no because they couldn't verify. I mean, this stuff sounds too absurd to be true until you hear it over and over again. We've also had it verified that we're not allowed to take dogs into the Afghanis' houses anymore. Our dogs are sophisticated tools for us, and they save human lives because we send them in with cameras. And our guys, before they go into a house, can see what's in there, and they, it's like seeing through the walls to send the dog in to look out first. And now the Afghans have complained because they see dogs as filthy, and so now we're not allowed to use our dogs. So better spare a child of one of our children's lives, right, than insult the Afghan by sending his dog in. This is the sort of thing. We've been told by people over there that if a Taliban member opens fire on you, then runs behind a rock, when he pops his head back up, you can't engage him until you have verified that he didn't lay his gun down behind the rock. So in effect, you have to be shot at twice before you can return fire on somebody who's trying to kill you. And this is what they're dealing with day in and day out. And Billy and I believe wholeheartedly this is why we have never seen such a high suicide rate among active members of our armed forces. And we believe it's this demoralization and this fear of the rules of engagement. Everybody saw the movie Lone Survivor. You go and you watch that movie, and the first thing you see is, why did it all happen? Because they were more worried about what CNN would say about them or what consequences they may face back here in the United States than saving their lives. And this is what we're dealing with still.
Absolutely. And the irony of it all is that we're investing so much time and money in training our soldiers to be amazing warriors, and then after all that training, after all that skill, and after obviously the virtues that they contain that they're bringing with them, so all of that talent and resource that we've invested, and we're putting them in the field, and we're basically saying, we want you to win this thing, but we're not going to let you be a warrior. That's what we're doing.
Absolutely. We are throwing away our national treasure monetarily and physically. And, I just was talking to a group last night, and something dawned on me that on that chopper, we always talk about SEAL Team 6, and there were 15 Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 that died the night that our son died, him being one of them. There were 2 other Navy SEALs from the West Coast, the most elite warriors the world has ever known. We also had 5 SEAL Team support staff on that chopper, and here's the thing. When you make it to SEAL Team 6, and you're working as support staff for SEAL Team 6, you're the best in the world at what you do. So we lost 2 cryptologists. We lost 2 explosive ordnance guys on there. We lost a dog handler. They were the best in America. That's why they were chosen to work with SEAL Team 6. So just the money that we lost on that. And then let me back up and say we put them all in a 1960s era helicopter that was built to haul cargo. And we sent them into a 3.5-hour firefight with no pre-assault fire. And this is what we did with that sort of treasure, both in life and in money. I've been told that you can pretty much guesstimate about $10 million has been invested in a Navy SEAL by the time he reaches the pinnacle of SEAL Team 6. So just think about the assets that were on that chopper that night. This is insanity. There's no excuse for it. We also told...
Yes, it is absolutely insane, Karen, and I commend you on the wide range of knowledge that you're now accumulating on all of this. I mean, we spoke in a phone conversation a couple of weeks ago, and you told me that as a result of this, so many families are telling you their stories, and the stories are so gripping. I mean, in one that you wrote in World Tribune, that article is called "The Reckless Endangerment of U.S. Warfighters Has Got to Stop." You talk about a Navy SEAL who was arguing with the senior leadership about how much reckless danger he was being exposed to, and the senior leadership was telling him that he's being illogical. I mean, and what you're seeing now is, like you say, the Army is our warriors are being paralyzed by this because they understand what needs to be done, and they have to also invest so much energy now in trying to convince others to protect them. And it's their job to protect them. It's their job to ensure that the mission has the adequate resources and can be carried out with the proper rules of engagement. So what you have right now, there's no question about it, you have the destruction of our armed forces. I mean, look, anybody out there who's listening to this show, you can be as patriotic as you want. In your right mind, would you tell your son and daughter to join the American Armed Forces? We are spreading a vast demoralization, both within the American services and then for future generations to come. And Karen and Billy, you guys have also written another piece about the leadership problem we have in the armed forces. Somebody like Robert Gates, he waited until he was retired to tell the public what he had seen within the Obama administration. That is just a gross negligence of his primary duty to serve and protect the American people. He saw that President Obama is not committed to the mission in Afghanistan. And instead of letting the public know that as soon as he knew it, he waited for an opportune time. He basically put his own self-interest above the interests of the armed forces, of the warriors that are there, and above the interests of the American people. And so this is spelling disaster for us. It spells disaster both currently in Afghanistan for our soldiers who feel that they're tugged in every direction except the right one to be the warriors that they were trained to be and obviously have a vocation to be. And also it spells disaster for us going forward in the future because who in the right mind is going to join the U.S. forces? I mean, what are you hearing, Karen and Billy, about retention and recruitment? That's going to collapse. It's only a matter of time.
Well, after Robert Gates retired, between the time that he saw the problem and announced the problem, it cost another 850 Americans their lives, another 850 American families the loss of a loved one. So here again, politics played in. I can't answer that question you just asked about recruitment. I don't know if Karen does or not, but I don't have any information on that, Grace. I'm sorry.
But we do get asked routinely now, and what would we say to a family member? And it's never been harder because you're absolutely right. Who could, with a clear conscience, tell their child to go join this military the way they're being compromised? And it is very difficult to say that because I love our military. But another thing we have right now, Dr. Grace, is the fact that we're being told, this isn't just something Billy and Karen have dreamed of. We're being told this by people who are in battle, that we have a senior leadership right now that has never fought in wars. And they've certainly never fought in a long war like these men and women who have been on the ground for 12 years now. These people have this experience, yet these senior leadership, they sit back here at their white linen tablecloth dinners, and they make up all these rules, and they tell people that they're illogical when they talk about the enemy that they're facing in Afghanistan. And it's just criminal, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. But I know that Billy and I are going to continue talking about it. We're going to keep it on the surface, and we're keeping the scab picked off of this rotten sore.
Right, and we are going to keep the crusade and the drumbeat alive along with you. We thank you. We applaud you for everything you've done, and you have nailed it. The American Armed Forces right now, it is not the elite fighting force that it can and should be. It has become nothing other than one big bureaucracy with guns. That is what we have in Afghanistan right now, and unless we turn things around, we are going to continue to lose our most valued treasure, which is those very brave men and women that we are sending so recklessly into harm's way. Thank you, Karen and Billy, for joining us. I am Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, and we are upholding values that will never, ever die.
It took all the footage off my TV.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Blessed up, so you got your head in the clouds. You made a fool out of you, and boy, she's bringing you down. She made your heart melt, but you're cold to the core. Now rumor has it she ain't got your love anymore. Rumor has it.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I'm your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Well, what a week it has been. As you can tell, my blood pressure has gone up and up and up. I'm just outraged at the news these days, and I wish I could give you good news on this show. Unfortunately, so much of the news coming from the Obama administration is really upsetting, it's really infuriating, and it's really alarming. If we had a paid foreign agent sent to the United States to destroy this nation, I don't think that person could be any more effective than the current president of the United States of America. And I do not say that lightly. This week, another really alarming decision. The Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, announced that there are going to now be massive cuts to our armed forces. So he wants to cut it to levels that we haven't seen since before World War II. He wants the forces to be somewhere around 440,000 or 450,000 troops by 2019. Now, it does not take a rocket scientist to figure out that the world right now is not a very safe place. We have problems just about everywhere. And you've got to really scratch your head and say, I don't understand. Why would you be cutting back the armed forces when the world is ever more unstable, ever more in need of American forces? Everywhere we can point to nowadays, there is great turbulence. And I'll run down all those areas. But the question I just want to ask point blank is, why on earth would you even consider scaling back your armed forces at a moment when the world is upside down? I mean, just look around. Recently in Iraq, we had Al-Qaeda laying claim to some of the cities that we thought we had secured. And yet the black flag of Al-Qaeda was raised there. So we have Iraq in turbulence. We have Iran that is on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon. And I don't care what this administration is trying to tell us about. They're going to negotiate and they're going to play by the rules. They are laughing at us behind our backs. They have achieved what they wanted, was some temporary financial relief, but they are going forward to build that nuclear weapon, and that is going to spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. So that's a huge problem in the future. We have Syria that has been in a 3-year bloodbath. Not only that, but the leader of Syria promised to give up his weapons of mass destruction. And guess what? The deadline came and the deadline went. And did he give us his weapons of mass destruction? No, just a small portion of the chemical weapons that he promised to give. So he, along with Vladimir Putin, have taken the measure of Obama, and they have decided, I don't need to play ball. I am just going to pretend to cooperate, and in reality, I won't cooperate. I'm just going to continue what I'm doing here, which is I am going after the rebels, period. And I don't care what the West says. What are they going to do after all? And now what do we see? Rearing its ugly head, Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has become emboldened. It was he, in fact, who stepped into that power vacuum in the Middle East and brokered this deal with the Syrian leader. The deal basically allows Vladimir Putin and Iran to continue to exercise enormous influence in the Middle East, all of which being contrary to American interests. And what about with his neighbor now, Ukraine? Ukraine is in deep turmoil right now. Its leader has been ousted. There's a revolution afoot. And what is Russia doing? Well, Russia is engaged in military maneuvers. They can easily step in, for example, and take possession of a part of Ukrainian land like the Crimea, which has a vast Russian-speaking population, many of whom still believe that they should follow in the trajectory of Russia. They have great loyalty to Russia. So we have Vladimir Putin, who is emboldened not just on the world stage, but even in how he's going to deal with his own neighbor, a country like Ukraine. So what we have seen during the Obama administration is very simple. He projected great weakness in how he handled the Syria debacle. And as a result, there is a massive power vacuum. And basically, everyone is stepping forward to try to seize the mantle within that power vacuum. So this is causing tremendous turmoil and turbulence just about everywhere in the world, because you no longer have a tough cop on the block. The American policeman has signaled that he's not going to be on his beat. And now we're sending another signal, loud and clear, with what the Secretary of Defense just said. We are going to cut back our armed forces, and this is going to do only one thing. It's going to continue to embolden all of our enemies around the world. They understand the signal that this is sending. America no longer has any appetite to fight any wars. And even if that is true, because we are war weary, we are exhausted, it is the responsibility of our leaders not to let the rest of the world understand that, not to send that signal so clearly. You always, as a leader, have to put up a strong facade and let the world know that you will take military action when needed. Otherwise, you have no clout on the world stage whatsoever. So the President of the United States with his defense secretary are not creating a world where there is greater peace. They're not creating a world where there is more respect for the United States of America. They're creating a world which is descending into greater turbulence, turmoil, and chaos. And in fact, there is less respect for the United States of America. There is less respect, especially for the leader. A recent Gallup poll shows that Americans believe that we are less respected around the world than ever before, that the leaders around the world don't respect us. And why should they respect us? You have to project strength, conviction, and power in order to win respect. And let's be frank, how do you really win respect? Fear. It is better to be feared than loved, said Niccolo Machiavelli, the author of that brilliant political tract, The Prince. It is better to be feared than loved. But what's the current president of the United States doing? We are not feared, but we're not loved either. Nobody loves us. Why? Because they have seen us abandon our allies. So we are achieving nothing with this foreign policy. We are only inviting future problems. And you mark my words, those problems are going to grow bigger by the day. They are going to grow bigger. And in order to quell them before the Obama administration is out, what's going to happen is only other strong men are going to get stronger and stronger as they step into the vacuum. And all of that is going to act against America's best interest. So, like I said at the beginning of this monologue, if you actually paid a foreign enemy to come into the United States and destroy our standing in the world, you couldn't do a better job than the job that President Barack Hussein Obama is doing. And another really disturbing story this week. Congress held hearings on the imperial presidency. The question being raised is the president usurping his powers at home? So think of the irony of this. He's the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, and we give him great power to exercise that around the world. But he's not interested in that. So the power that he does have, he doesn't really care to exercise except to diminish it and destroy it. So he doesn't really want to be commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But the power that he doesn't have at home, that's the power he really, really is going after. Talk about chaos and destruction. So he's weakening us abroad, but at home, he's slowly eroding the Constitution. He's eroding the very system of checks and balances that we've had in place since the founding of this republic. The question being asked is he overreaching in his use of executive authority? And you had professors of law, even left-wing professors. You had a professor from Georgetown University who said, I agree with the president's policies, but he's destroying the Constitution. I don't agree with the way that he's executing his prerogative. He's overstepping his bounds. He doesn't have the right to simply suspend parts of any piece of legislation that he doesn't agree with, which is what he's done with Obamacare. So we are seeing a president who is destroying the very careful system of checks and balances that has worked brilliantly for our republic since its founding. And what he wants is to simply willy-nilly ignore the laws that he doesn't like and enforce some of the laws that he does like. And if he can't get Congress to pass a specific law, he's going to try to find some means within his executive power to push forward that agenda. This is undemocratic. This is not who we are. This is not the United States of America. This is not how we do things here. We understand that no single person should have that much power. That's why we're a democracy. We exercise limitations upon one another all the time. That's why we have recurring elections. That's why we have 3 branches of government. That's why we have a Supreme Court and a judicial branch that oversees what the legislative branch is doing, because we don't trust anybody to exercise power. And yet the president acts like he, in his benevolence, in his enlightened benevolence, knows what is best for the American people, and he can pick and choose which laws to enforce and which laws to ignore. This is an imperial presidency. And just like he is destroying our standing in the world, just like he's destroying where we stand amongst foreign nations, he is also destroying our Constitution and the very careful relationship that the president has with the other branches of government. What did the congressional hearing conclude? The president does appear to be overreaching, no doubt about it. He is doing what no other president in American history has done. And what is the response? Can we impeach him? Well, that's just too incendiary right now. We don't want to go down that road. And so the only path forward is to challenge him in the courts and try to get him back to his proper sphere in the exercise of his executive authority. All of that must go forward, and we, the American people, have to continue to encourage lawmakers to press those lawsuits. There's even a bill in Congress now to ensure that any challenge for executive or authority is expedited. And certainly we have to agree with that. And we are going to keep our eye to ensure that this president goes back into the proper sphere as designated by our very brilliant founding fathers. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that are never going to die.
You will never sleep alone. I'll love you long after you go, and long after you're gone, gone, gone.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
But the monster that's under my bed, get along with the voices inside of my head. You're trying to save me, stop holding your breath. And you think I'm crazy, yeah, you think I'm crazy.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. And we're coming in with that song about a monster because you are not going to believe the next story that we're going to cover. It just shows how government power is going amok. We have Glenn Greenwald, the very courageous journalist who broke the story on the NSA. He has published a series of documents, and he's also given an interview where he describes that what the British government has done and its intelligence agency known as the GCHQ. So this is about the British government and what their specific intelligence agency does to discredit opponents. And this is absolutely unbelievable. Glenn Greenwald explains that you have a government agency that will actually try to destroy the reputation of dissidents by planting false information about them on the internet and a whole series of other tactics. Now, you might ask the question, okay, Dr. Grace, so who cares what's going on with the British and their intelligence agency? Well, recently, Lieutenant Zullo has said that the American government has a similar tactic. There's a government agency in the United States. It's called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's called DARPA. It's a part of the United States Department of Defense, and their mission is essentially to wage psychological warfare. But Lieutenant Zullo is reporting that the psychological warfare that's being waged by DARPA nowadays, and he's got documents that he's going to reveal about this, he's going to bring forward the evidence he's uncovered, that this actually is being waged against dissidents in the United States. That is, people who don't agree with the president's policies or who disagree with various parts of the liberal agenda. So when you listen to Glenn Greenwald tell us about what the British government have been doing, just put that in your mind as that's exactly what the American government is doing. Roll it, Brittany.
These documents were among the ones that I found most shocking pretty early on because they talk about how the British government, and this was in a presentation made to the NSA and 3 other allies, how the British government and its intelligence agency, the GCHQ, does things like false flag operations, as they call them, where they post very incriminating things to the internet and then attribute it falsely to someone whose reputation they're trying to smear, or they notify their friends and family, or they disseminate destructive information about them.
So essentially, you have government agencies that are targeting citizens that they disagree with, and they're targeting them by trying to destroy their reputations by smearing them on the internet. So they're going to post incriminating materials about them on the internet, do anything they can to assault their reputation, and even notify friends and family. And you know how it goes. Once a rumor starts spreading, increasingly on the internet, it's taken as, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. That person's got to be involved in this in some way, shape, or form. And it really does have an effect. I mean, look what they have done to so many folks who ask simple questions about Obama's birth certificate. They've completely marginalized them. That's just one example. I can tell you this, they have smeared me. They have smeared my husband. They smeared my husband when he published an article asking about the Muslim roots of candidate Obama then in 2008. So it seems like this is not just fellow liberal citizens who might be engaging in a debate with others and they might post something negatively about their opponent on the internet. No, what we're discovering is that sometimes these are actually agents of the British or American government. They're targeting certain people and they're trying to smear their reputations. This is outrageous. There's more. Roll it, Brittany.
They use honey traps, which is the use of sexually appealing women, whether fictionalized or real, to lure their targets into compromising situations. And it's not just the normal spycraft where they're doing it to the leaders of hostile countries or the military or intelligence officials. It's directed at people who are just dissidents, people with the group Anonymous, people they call hacktivists, normal criminal suspects who have been charged with no crime. They infiltrate online communities. They essentially disseminate deception throughout the internet, making the internet really an untrustworthy place to be.
So essentially, they're using tactics against their own citizens to destroy them so they can shut them up. And, you know, if you actually go online and you look at the documents that Glenn Greenwald has published, these are actually 4 classified documents from the British intelligence agencies. I mean, you're just not going to believe your eyes. I mean, one of them, well, their goal is, quote, to inject all sorts of false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of its targets. End quote. Another one, to use social science and other techniques to manipulate online discourse and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. End of quote. In other words, when you're on the internet, you don't know who you're talking to. You could actually be communicating with somebody that is a paid agency of the British or American government out there trying to generate a specific outcome of a dialogue on a chat site, or somebody trying to spread false rumor about another individual. This has got to be stopped. Listen to how bad it gets. Roll it, Brittany.
Where what they were doing was they were monitoring people who visited the WikiLeaks website, which could be journalists, it could be supporters, it could be people who are whistleblowers wanting to give information, and they used their access to the fiber optic cables to collect very invasive information, including their IP address, which can enable the government to individually identify somebody. So you have groups like WikiLeaks and Anonymous and hacktivists. We published a story a couple months ago about using the porn habits of people that the government deems radicals to try and destroy their reputation. You know, in every era when the government targets dissidents, those dissidents are never popular. So a lot of people don't like WikiLeaks or hacktivists. Back in the 60s and 70s, people didn't like various civil rights leaders. They didn't like anti-war groups. But the point is, you should not have the government being able to destroy people using covert means.
the government is destroying people using covert means. In other words, we have British and American government using tactics that they were given originally to be used against foreign enemies. But these tactics are being used on the internet to destroy citizens whose points of view might be contrary to whatever the government or particular administration wants. This is absolutely outrageous. It is chilling. I've got to say, quite honestly, I never thought I would live to see the day that I would be hearing such stories about the two countries that are historically the bastions of liberty, Britain and the United States. And we're actually talking about paid agents of the government that won't allow citizens to simply engage in a debate or a discussion. They won't allow citizens to simply say, I disagree, I don't like that policy, to the point that the paid agents of the government will smear them online, will try to collect, for example, what their porn habits are, and then disseminate that information so it'll destroy their reputation. They'll try to create a honey trap, which is send some kind of luscious woman to lure somebody into a trap so that person will be compromised. This truly is government gone amok. This truly is a monster. These are programs that have to be eliminated, root and branch. So the news this week has been all across the board very alarming and very, very disturbing. Well, we are going to turn now for a moment of levity, a moment of respite, just a moment to gain our sanity. The Oscars are on this weekend. I do think there is cause to celebrate. Great song choice, by the way. The celebration is that here in the United States of America, we are still producing some truly amazing movies. And I think the greatest movie of 2013, no doubt about it, was American Hustle. I am rooting for it, and I want to share my Oscar pick. So my pick for best movie has got to be American Hustle. My choice for best director is the brilliant man who directed American Hustle, David O. Russell. I think best actor should go hands down to Christian Bale, who plays a con artist, but one who is actually really brilliant. He collaborates with the FBI to some extent. And there's also a love story embroiled in all of this drama. It's really, really good. It's a story of redemption to some extent, one might say. So I think he definitely deserves Best Actor. And Best Supporting Actress and Best Supporting Actor also, I believe, this year come from American Hustle. Best Supporting Actress, no question about it. It has got to be Jennifer Lawrence. She does an awesome job playing the jilted wife of the man that Christian Bale plays. And she is able to convey all of these erratic moods. And it's quite a funny character, but also the pain of being cheated on. I think she captures that quite brilliantly. So Jennifer Lawrence for Best Supporting Actress, and Best Supporting Actor, I think also from American Hustle, has got to be Bradley Cooper, who plays the FBI agent who in all his hubris is convinced that he's going to be able to control events, and then he realizes that he cannot, and he actually becomes the laughingstock of the movie. Well, Bradley Cooper does a great job, and some of the funniest scenes are actually some stuff that he did ad hominem, impromptu, as he later said in interviews. You'll see what I mean when you see it. He mocks one of his superiors, and it's really extremely well done. So I guess all across the board, I'm rooting for American Hustle in every single category, with the exception of one, and that is Best Actress. I think Best Actress, no doubt about it, should be Cate Blanchett in Blue Jasmine. So I hope you enjoy Oscar weekend, and And I hope that American hustle cleans house. You are listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that will never, ever die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.